Hello everyone, welcome to Diplomatic Briefing. This year, the BRICS countries are holding their summit in South America, with the main theme being openness and cooperation. At the same time, in North America, US President Trump is once again wielding his tariff stick, even openly threatening the BRICS countries. On July 6, Trump threatened on social media that any countries supporting the BRICS countries' anti-American policies would face an additional 10% tariff. As the host, Brazilian President Lula responded on behalf of the BRICS countries with a high-profile counterattack. On July 7, after the BRICS leaders' summit in Rio de Janeiro, when asked by reporters about Trump's tariff threats, Lula firmly stated that the world has changed and we don't need an emperor. Lula emphasized that the BRICS countries want to find another way to organize the world economically, and that's exactly why some people are feeling uneasy. His exact words were, "This is a group of countries seeking a new way to organize the world economically. I believe it is precisely for this reason that the BRICS countries make some people uneasy." Lula once again expressed his view that global trade should break free from its dependence on the US dollar. He said that the world must find a way for our trade relations not to have to go through the dollar. At the press conference after the summit, Lula said, "Of course, we must approach this with caution and responsibility. Our central bank needs to hold discussions with the central banks of other countries." He added that this will be a gradual process that will eventually be consolidated. This is not the first time Lula has criticized Trump. On June 25, Lula criticized Trump's tone and the way he communicates with the media. He said that as the president of a country as large as the United States, Trump should be more cautious with his words and actions. Lula also advised Trump to spend less time online and act more like a head of state, to think more about multilateralism, and to focus more on peace. Other BRICS countries also refuted Trump's threats. Only India has not issued an official response to Trump's remarks. July 7 press conference, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning said the BRICS mechanism is an important platform for cooperation between emerging markets and developing countries. It advocates openness, inclusiveness, and win-win cooperation, avoids bloc confrontation, and targets no country. Reuters described the BRICS countries as positioning themselves as a safe haven for multilateral diplomacy against the backdrop of escalating armed conflicts and trade tensions. Saudi Arabia has officially accepted the invitation to become a full member and is currently participating as a partner country, while more than 30 countries have expressed interest in formally joining BRICS cooperation either as member states or partner countries. To sum up simply, first, Lula himself is a semi-revolutionary political figure who comes from the working class. He is quite principled and has grown through struggle, so you could say he's tough. In the Russia-Ukraine conflict, he has not been afraid of pressure from Biden and insists on working with China to come up with a peace plan for the global South. So, he finds Trump's blatant hegemony even more intolerable. With China taking the lead, Brazil is also riding the momentum of the global South and becoming increasingly blunt with the United States. Second, Lula is also a pragmatic politician. Brazil's strengths lie in resources and agricultural products, which puts it in direct competition with the United States. To put it bluntly, since Trump started the trade war, China has bought less, or even stopped buying, American soybeans and corn, and instead has made large purchases of Brazilian agricultural products, as well as beef, pork, and poultry. Brazil has become the best alternative source to the US. The benefits Brazil has gained are very real and tangible. Third, Brazil is rich in natural minerals and is actually highly complementary to China. However, due to lagging infrastructure, plus the fact that shipping minerals from Brazil to Asia, where they are most needed, requires going around the Panama Canal, the costs are very high. But now, China has built a deep-water port in Peru. If the land route between Brazil and Peru is opened up, goods can go straight from Peru to Shanghai, Tokyo, and Southeast Asia. This would allow direct interaction between Asia and South America, bypassing US control. Naturally, Brazil has become more assertive, and even Argentina's President Milei, who has close personal ties with Trump, has changed his stance and is seeking to deepen trade relations with China. In conclusion, the crazier Trump acts, the more motivated Asian and South American countries are to get closer to each other, and they are even less likely to damage their relations with China. In addition, after the new Canadian Prime Minister took office, although he is tougher on Trump compared to his predecessor Trudeau, it's still very difficult for him to really stand up to Trump. On the contrary, anti-American sentiment among the Canadian public is actually quite radical. On July 7th, U.S. President Trump signed an executive order, sending letters to 14 countries to extend the so-called reciprocal tariff 90-day exemption period, pushing the original July 9th deadline back to August 1st. Some Canadian scholars have published articles saying that Trump is using endless tariffs to launch a full-scale attack on the global trade system, blatantly and recklessly violating World Trade Organization (WTO) rules without being punished, and posing a major threat to the global economy. The scholars believe that since Trump has turned the United States into a trade rogue state, WTO members should unite to kick the U.S. out of the WTO, revoke its membership, make it an international outcast, and establish a WTO without the United States in order to curb the disastrous impact brought by Trump. Professor Hopewell from the University of British Columbia in Canada, author of Clash of Powers and Breaking the WTO, published an opinion piece in Politico Europe on July 7th local time, stating that Trump has threatened to impose a 50% tariff on almost all goods from the European Union starting July 9th, which would slow down the EU's economic growth. The global economy is on the edge of a cliff. Hopewell believes that since his second term, Trump has launched a full-scale attack on the global trade system, using tariffs on key materials to intimidate countries around the world, and has even stopped pretending to follow WTO rules. The tariff war he has started could send the world back to the 1930s, when the U.S. Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act led to rampant trade protectionism and ultimately worsened the Great Depression. In this situation, allowing the United States to remain in the World Trade Organization is a mockery at the WTO and its principles. The article argues that countries committed to upholding rules and trade order must fight back and defend the system by imposing penalties. The United States is openly violating WTO rules. The article points out that as early as Trump's first term, he strongly promoted unilateralism and trade protectionist policies, and his criticism of international organizations such as the WTO and WHO has never ceased. As an organization that arbitrates trade disputes, the WTO has long been constrained and restricted by the United States. Hopewell said that by paralyzing the WTO's appellate mechanism, the United States has rendered global trade rules unenforceable. In numerous disputes involving violations of WTO rules, the U.S. has trampled on international regulations with impunity. An even greater danger is that rule-breaking behavior will continue to spread, eventually leading to the collapse of global trade. If Trump blatantly violates the rules without facing any consequences, why should other countries bother to follow them? The article points out that the United States accounts for only 1/10 of global trade. Even without U.S. participation, the global trading system can still function, but only if other countries continue to abide by the rules. If countries all follow Trump's example in breaking the rules, imposing tariffs, and adopting other protectionist measures, this system will not be able to survive. The risk of such contagion poses a major threat to the global economy. Therefore, Hopewell believes that WTO members must unite, clearly reject Trump's trade aggression, and make it clear that this is unacceptable. The only way to preserve the system is to expel or suspend the United States WTO membership. Hopewell explains that although the WTO Charter does not explicitly specify procedures for expelling members, according to Article 10 of the Marrakesh Agreement regarding amendments, if 2/3 of the members vote to amend the agreement, the United States can be removed. If the United States refuses to accept the amendment, then a 3/4 majority vote is required. Hopewell believes that this U.S. president has repeatedly threatened to withdraw from the WTO, and now it's time to call his bluff. He points out that the United States should not be allowed to continue enjoying the benefits of WTO membership without bearing any of the responsibilities, and stripping it of its WTO rights could ultimately become the necessary leverage to force Trump to abandon his destructive tariffs. The article states that if the United States is kicked out of the WTO, it will lose the opportunity to access global markets with WTO preferential tariffs, may face unlimited punitive tariffs, and will also lose market access for service exports as well as the system for protecting intellectual property rights. These are all fundamental to America's economic success in the modern era and its dominance in high-tech fields. The United States would also lose the protection of the WTO's anti-trade discrimination provisions, which would allow other countries to impose export restrictions and thereby cut off its supply chains for critical goods. Hopewell believes that although the WTO has never expelled a member before, the level of violations by the Trump administration is also unprecedented, so extraordinary measures should be taken in response. Especially now that the WTO's appellate mechanism has come to a halt, supporters of the multilateral trade order should unite to push for an amendment to suspend or revoke the United States WTO membership. He also said that Trump has turned the United States into a trade rogue state, completely disregarding international law and even the idea that trade should be governed by the rule of law. Excluding the United States would make it clear that the country holds the status of an international pariah. He called for preparations to establish a WTO without the United States in order to counter Trump. He said that the WTO must take action to address and curb the disastrous effects of Trump's misguided policies. In conclusion, the views of this Canadian scholar are well-founded. Unfortunately, Western countries like those in the EU are still wholeheartedly siding with the United States. In reality, the only country that is fully prepared to do business without the United States is China. So China has also become the only country to implement reciprocal countermeasures against the United States, which makes the US particularly uncomfortable.